everyone, today we're looking at Avengers Volume 5, as written by Jonathan Hickman, who for some reason last round I referred to as Alan Hickman. I don't know why, that just happened. But now I know his name, ready to go, and we're going to be talking about Time Runs Out. So here we are at round 20 of grading the Avengers. With only a few left after this, I'm really interested to see how people feel about some of the most recent Avengers books, starting with this one here. This particular volume is recent enough that we are broaching the earliest days of Comic Island itself, to the extent that Joey and I have already pretty thoroughly recapped the events of Time Runs Out. I'll attach the associated link to the video I'm referring to here, which should give some people an idea of what's going on, but in short, Avengers Volume 5, or Time Runs Out, as the larger narrative of this creative run is referred to, features the Avengers going up against a threat unlike any they've faced before: the entire end of the multiverse and all known reality. Largely focusing on the Illuminati as its main characters, these Avengers books focus on the discovery of these incursion events, where universes have begun to collapse in on one another. It leads them to a situation the Avengers, as they stand, are basically unable to grapple with morally. To survive, the only way forward is to destroy other Earths so both universes can live. But outside of rare situations, that means destroying an Earth populated with people, no different from the one we live on now. The moral implication of these incursions essentially breaks down, psychologically, every Avenger involved. Steve Rogers, who joined the Illuminati as a result of events in Avengers Volume 4, clings to his morals so stubbornly he literally would have gotten every human being on his Earth killed, and as a result wiped out all of reality with it, while characters like Tony Stark, Namor, and Doctor Strange basically corrupt themselves and become villains in order to keep the Earth still standing. The story is much, much more complicated than this, bouncing back and forth between the main Avengers series and a run of new Avengers comics, while also heavily involving crossover events Age of Ultron, Infinity, Original Sin, and Axis. This is by far the least accessible and one of the more event-heavy runs of comics in Avengers history. So perhaps I'm about to make myself a bit of a hypocrite when I say I truly love these Avengers books and this story. While I recognize that the biggest flaws are they are very demanding runs of books that are not only event-heavy but have you know a lot of stuff about the world of Marvel and its history from its earliest days all the way into the 21st century to truly appreciate everything Hickman is going for in this run. But none of that really bothers me because I know these things, I've read these books, and as much as the tie-ins can be a nuisance, they often, and kind of uniquely, work in favor of actually adding to the story of Time Runs Out. Age of Ultron felt like it was a sort of force that propelled the incursions forward, forcing various characters to act with regards to them. Infinity brought Thanos and the Black Order into the equation, and they all proved to be an essential part in Earth's continued survival. Original Sin brought Steve Rogers back into the story after the Illuminati, in my opinion, rightfully wiped out his memory so they could continue going about the business of keeping Earth safe. And finally, Axis was Tony's particular nail in the coffin, sending his character into full villain mode and putting him once again in direct opposition with Captain America. And it's kind of cool because this time I'm pro-Iron Man for this story. All the old morality and beliefs of superheroes feel like they fall apart in the face of incursions. You either hold to your principles and die, like Steve Rogers wanted to, or you go on living, hoping you survive long enough to reverse everything. Tony Stark is largely right throughout this story because of that, as is Thanos, Doctor Doom, Doctor Strange, and a host of other more practical characters. Faced with this kind of oblivion, these characters were right to go into a mode of survival at any cost. In comparison, Captain America, while morally right, would have gotten everyone killed. The Illuminati are directly involved in events that ultimately preserve all of reality in a way Rogers simply couldn't have because of who he is. And it doesn't make him look particularly endearing. In some ways it feels like it's just so he could basically pat himself on the back and tell himself he did the right thing, as oblivion strikes all around him. It's a rough attitude for me to take towards Captain America, but it does reflect his behavior in general, too. We look at Steve Rogers in a moment like Civil War, leading a movement that is morally on the right side of history, but practically lacks any realistic goals of any kind. Was Captain America prepared to overthrow the government? Was that his plan for the first Civil War? I don't think so. I don't think Rogers really thought it through much beyond just permanently going rogue, even though his followers would pay for that choice dearly. But it feels like the writing under Hickman with the Avengers, and dealing with all this stuff, is using a level of maturity and thoughtfulness that is lacking from past writers we've talked about in this series, like Jeff Johns, Chuck Austen, Mark Millar, and Brian Michael Bendis. Mature comics and ideas have been around with these guys for well over a decade by the time Hickman came along. But he's the one, I feel, that actually grapples with these ideas, and does it properly for the first time since Kirk Busiek. Hickman feels like he's taking the Avengers to a whole new level. There are very serious and intelligent ideas being floated throughout Time Runs Out, about everything from the ethics of survival to nihilism and the nature or value in belief. For a very dark story, perhaps the darkest in all of Avengers history, I never hated reading it. It was at times miserable and even depressing, but it was enticing, mysterious, and interesting enough that I wanted to keep going. And by the time you get to what it's all building up to, that 2015 Secret Wars event, also written by Hickman, and the big blockbuster end of his time with the series, you realize the arc of his story was ultimately one of hope. In a lot of ways, the size and scale of Time Runs Out and Secret Wars reminds me a lot of a Lord of the Rings style epic. A big, long, and dark journey, one where you almost can't believe the heroes are going to make it out and win in the end. But they did, even if most of them did die and they were remade into new versions of themselves that don't quite remember what happened. We as readers and a few other characters remember, and that's what matters. Because Marvel was never quite the same after this story. And looking back on it, this really is one of my all-time favorite periods in Marvel's history, for better or worse. This time is full of new ideas, characters developing and moving forward, while also some of the more fun and epic crossover events Marvel has ever done. Everything about it is just very interesting. I could make multiple videos on each character's role in this story, especially key figures like Mr. Fantastic or Doctor Strange. So, in some ways, it doesn't really matter how many crossover events there were, or how many comics you are expected to read. At a certain point, if those comics are good and entertaining enough, if there's these philosophical and political ideas being explored, rock-solid character work overriding and surpassing pretty much everything done anywhere else in Avengers history, none of that matters. I love a lot of those old Avengers books we've talked about earlier in this series, but none of them even come close to broaching some of these ideas and themes Hickman explores in Avengers Volume 5. And then to top it all off, we also get some of the most memorable and beautiful art in Avengers history. There's a lot of names involved here, not only some we've talked about before in grading the Avengers, who really shine here, like Mike Deodato or Adam Kubert, but also pretty hefty talent relatively new to the Avengers, like Lenil Francis Yu, Salvador Larroca, and Dustin Weaver. Combined with closely related new Avengers series being published at the time, and it's a very moving series of books giving the depth of narration going on here. These artists truly add something to the Avengers of this era. Given the content at hand, it was a real challenge consistently keeping these books feeling more epic than grim-dark. And I would say, on the whole, they achieve things quite miraculously. By the time things build up to Secret Wars, the story has become so much bigger than just one about the Avengers. Not only is it a big celebration of all things Marvel, not only does it do it in a way that I found fairly touching, but those stories explored ideas and character work that no other Avengers book in history has ever really touched on. It's not for everyone. There's problems left and right, and I do recognize that. We have so many books that are basically required reading for any of this to make sense, or for the payoff of Secret Wars to feel like payoff. For people who cut right to the event, a lot of that content is going to be lost on them. Likewise, I don't think people realize what it was like reading these books over the few years these stories were all rolling out. The slow, steady march of incursions was often quietly touched on in other stories and series. The grim reality at hand became harder and harder to ignore following stuff like Axis, where everything really just seemed to be falling apart in the world of Marvel. Things got dark, darker than they had ever been or ever will be, and I had no idea where the story was going from there. But with deft writing, a commitment to a larger narrative, and a strong focus on character work, Jonathan Hickman, in my opinion, pulled something off truly unique in Avengers history that no other writer has really achieved before or since, at least not for the Avengers. And yes, there are decisions along the way that reek of Marvel's fingerprints. The decision to kind of retire the Fantastic Four for a time, as well as revealing that the Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver weren't really mutants during the Axis event. These were all Marvel playing games with their then divided movie rights with 20th Century Fox. But in spite of all of that, Jonathan Hickman's Avengers made me feel things, think about new ideas, and view decades-old characters in new ways that didn't feel forced or out of their character, given the overwhelming situation at hand. So on that note, as stated before, there are only 2 exact grades of any type allowed in grading the Avengers, to ensure we don't end up with a bunch of B grades or A grades or something. Therefore, I chose to give Time Runs Out, and only Time Runs Out, the equivalent grade to the original Avengers comics as created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. These 2 eras are very different and are going for completely different things, so they each got this grade for different reasons. Lee and Kirby are largely responsible for many of the traits, characters, and characteristics of the Avengers that hold up to this day. Hickman and his little army of artists, along with all the other editors and other creators involved in this project, including writers like Jason Aaron, Nick Spencer, and Rick Remender, who did some of the events and extra books we've talked about already. Well, these people were bold enough to take the Avengers in a truly new direction, covering this epic and fun ground that we hadn't seen before. This top-tier grade for the series, in my opinion, is well-deserved. Yeah, so a hefty review, a lot of praise for this book, but it's well-deserved. Next time, Mark Waid takes over the series for Avengers Volume 6, and if you're wondering how well that holds up against Jonathan Hickman's Avengers, well, stay tuned for next time.